And now live, it's AWS Howdy Partner. Take it away, Braden.
Hey, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to Howdy Partner, where we interview partners to be able to see what they've been able to they were up to this year. So today we have Peter from Docker, and I'm joined by Eugene, who's also a partner solutions architect. Peter, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Great. So how's Docker been this year? I know that they've released quite a few things that we're really excited to talk about. Let's just go ahead and jump into some of those things. Let's start here. I see here that ECS integration was one of those big things. What's happened so far since the last time we chatted?
Yeah. Been super excited about ECS this year, and some of the announcements that just came out. I'm sure we'll get to those in a minute. But yeah, really excited. We started out when was I on? A couple months ago? Like I think
so. Yeah.
And we did a demo there. We didn't have all the functionality we have now in the integration. So really excited about that with volumes and all kinds of stuff. Secrets, tighter integration using the compose spec, right? But not putting the vendor specific stuff in the spec. So that's really cool. The dev team's been, I swear, every time I check our Edge channel internally, they've added new features, new functionality. I'm really excited about the ECS integration. I was actually, researching and looking into some of the announcements for reInvent, and they were talking about ECS Anywhere. But anyways, I was watching a demo, and they were using our integration.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. They're doing Docker? Yeah, so that was.
Did even tell you that it just happened?
I'm not that high up on the food chain, so there's some others of Docker, but yeah. So that was super cool. I'm super excited about the ECS integration and just having it move forward and pick up more and more features of all of the services, right, to be able to integrate. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So with that, what are some of those ECS improvements that have been made? I know you mentioned some of them. What's one that you were specifically excited about that you improved your development or your life since it came out since the last time we talked?
Yeah, volumes
specifically. Cool.
Yeah, for to be able to do persistent storage was a big ask from our customers. Right, it was great to be able to run your containers pretty seamlessly. Right. So that was huge, but then also have persistent storage, right? And two, it's really cool for a couple of reasons. One is if you're doing like a dev environment or like a stage environment, and environments you want to spin up and down pretty quickly, you might not want to use a managed database service for that, right? So sure. Putting a single instance of MySQL or Mongo in a container and running that with your compose. And then tearing that back down, but having your test data and everything persist across starts and stops and stuff like that was sure. Huge. Probably in production, I would say, go with a managed database, right? So you don't have to, backups and all that OPSI stuff, right?
Sure.
But yeah, volumes was huge. Really excited with that. Being able to use, secrets is huge, and being able to connect into roles. Your security roles to give access to like S3 buckets and all those type of things is really pretty cool too. And then also being able to do scaling. So, auto scale, being able to spin up, spin back down, scale your clusters is really awesome too. So those three are super exciting to me. Was that 3 or 4? Can't remember. But
that's fine. But all of those sounds very exciting and fun to use.
Yeah, in a very super nerdy way that I hope everybody on your show is interested in. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So with that, that's ECS. I've also heard a little bit about the security scanning. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So we partnered up with Sneak, and the first place that we kind of integrated. So the whole, so let me jump back, right? So security from a developer's perspective, a lot of times is done at the very end, right? You might have this gate where you need to go into production and you need to get all your security checks, get the security group to sign off, right?
Sure.
And it's a little farther down the road. It's down the pipeline, your code pipeline, so to speak, or delivery pipeline, let's say. And so being able to push that a little bit left to the developer into their inner loop, so into their development loop when they're building containers, to be able to scan them locally and remediate vulnerabilities, doing that all locally, right? It was super cool, and putting it into the CLI, and it fits right in with, if you're using Docker, you're familiar with the commands, you're familiar with the structure of the commands, right? And so adding scanning in there was really cool. And then since it's part of the CLI too, you can add it into your CI/CD pipelines. So that's really cool. And then we integrated the scanning into Hub. And so when you can turn on and off for different repositories to scan your images, once you push an image, it will scan it for you, show you vulnerabilities, and then that way across your team, right? You can manage your vulnerabilities, and then you can segment across your teams, right? So you could have a development team that's responsible for the application code that goes into the container, and they can worry about those vulnerabilities. And if you have a DevSecOps or security group, or even DevOps, or someone who's in charge of like a base image, right? They can scan that image and handle those vulnerabilities, and then sharing through Hub, right? You developer can pull that down, worry only about their application code, and then share back through Hub. And then the whole team has visibility into those vulnerabilities and the health of your images, right? Wow. So that's really cool. That's really cool. And those integrations are going to get tighter and tighter, more and more features. So stand by, or stay tuned, maybe I should say.
So I guess like,
yeah.
So like, yeah. So I was gonna ask, kind of like, as like a former developer, like what, I guess what spurred you guys to really try to integrate like the security scanning, the image scanning at like the CI/CD level? Like, I guess like, we talked a little bit about like, having different teams and kind of like, moving a lot of the work away from like security teams and back onto the developers themselves, and give developers kind of like more power and more observability. But are there any other kind of like, key benefits to adding it to the CI/CD pipeline?
Well, Eugene, I first say, there's no such thing as an ex-developer, so you are always a developer.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, just like you said, being able to address the vulnerabilities earlier, right, and make that part of your process. So local development when you're building the images scan, right, and then being able to reproduce that through your CI/CD. I think that's one of the keys with CI/CD is, right, to set up the things that you would normally do manually to test and to build and test and ship, right? We used to do that all manually, have scripts and type of things, and then it would be scanned for security issues, right, and then remediated. But putting it into your CI/CD pipeline, that repeatability, that the insurance that you're doing these steps automatically, right, programmatically, and that every time you do it, it's getting scanned, right? And so it's right in your pipeline, it's repeatable, it's done automatically. I think that's a huge benefit, right? And so no one forgets, right? Like, we set up our CI/CD pipeline, and then, that's right, before we go to prod, we need to, pull the image down, manually scan it. Okay, you guys are good, you got the sign off, now go ahead, you're green, we have a go, so now go ahead, push to production, right? But if you're doing that automatically, then that's happening, constantly happening, right? And you catch the vulnerabilities earlier, right, and you can fix them earlier. I kind of view it as kind of an extension of your unit testing or testing, right?
Yeah, so I was going to say, it's like, from kind of like, like hearing it, like everything at like a high level, everything sounds great. But I think, for like a developer to kind of just go through the day-to-day motion, you're not going to think about unit tests until you're going to get a build message saying that like, hey, so your our coverage percentage from the code that you added is like, below 70%. Please add your unit tests. It kind of forces you to remember saying that like, hey, this is something that is really important. So anyways, yeah, I kind of want to just like from a base, like a developer's like perspective, right? It's to kind of reinforce that as you are building things throughout like a CI/CD pipeline, that you are being very, very aware of like these certain things, like unit testing, integration testing, and now image scanning. So
Yeah. And it's tools that you already know, right? And commands that you already know. So it's not, it's a little bit more simpler, right? Of course, they're, like all things, right? Once you dive a little more into it, they get very technical and deep, but setting it up initially at the very beginning, and then and then they're always just running. It's just part of your
daily routine.
Continuous delivery. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because I know, I've worked in dev shops, and I'm definitely dev shops that I've run, right? It's trying to set up processes. Hey, before you check in, right, or before you merge or anything, make sure you run unit tests, and not. That doesn't happen, right? That doesn't happen, right? And
you gotta write your unit test before you can run your unit test.
That's right, right. If you don't write new ones, none of them break, right? We're gonna go. I don't want to take it down a bad path on. You'll hear my true thoughts around unit testing and the real value of them. But I definitely think you should test. Everybody test your code, right? Unit test, end-to-end test, and add security, right? Scanning, right? At least at the base, just for the and the integration also with Sneak, it will gives you hints on the best base images to use, right? So it'll say have some vulnerabilities, let's say in an older base image, and it'll also tell you, hey, in our database we know this vulnerability is fixed in this base image, and while this base image you have 200 vulnerabilities, and if you bump up to the newer version of, let's say, the Node or the Python, right, now you're down to 50 in there, and 3/4 of those are low. And then you can see, well, these are, the attack services for these vulnerabilities. They're not an issue for me the way I run, and those type of things, right? But get it, unless you're doing that constantly, right? You just get overwhelmed, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you do it at the end and you see I have 500 vulnerabilities in my image, right? You just will pull your hair out and think of every excuse to just push to production, anyways, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So is there a place where developers can kind of get started early, a kind of quick starts URL where they can go ahead and start implementing this security feature?
Yeah, the best is to go, when you download desktop, in there we have a quick start guide, and that's 4 really quick steps. But then that starts a container with our getting started guide in it. Cool. And then that's a little more in depth, and we have a section in there on scanning, vulnerability remediation. For sure. And then awesome. I've done a workshop or 2 or live stream. If you check out our YouTube channel, there's some content on there also.
Cool.
And then in our docs, I can't forget about our docs. Our docs are really good.
Everyone loves reading docs. I don't know if you knew that, but they love, going through that with a fine-tooth comb and reading every word. It's delicious.
Ours are the best, I'm telling you. No, we try and do, we try and do both, right? It's like, yeah, you can read it very technical and dry on the documentation and all the flags, but then hopefully with that getting started guide and some YouTube videos, you can see, okay, this is the flow or how it fits all together in my whole process, right?
Right, yeah. Of course. And you actually mentioned something I'm interested in. You talked about desktop or Docker desktop, and I've heard that there's some new UI features and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit more about those new changes and updates?
Yeah, so over the past year, another development team in-house here at Docker, I mean, those folks just pump out features and just doing a ton of work, yeah. But they've revamped the UI. We have integration into Hub, so you can see your remote repositories. You can also see your images, the scans, if they've been scanned, right? What vulnerabilities are there, high, medium, low. You can see that in desktop. And then you can also see your containers that are running and applications that are running locally, and you can start and stop, remove them, those type of things. And then you can also start an image in desktop, set environment variables and those type of things right in the UI. So there's folks out in the world that love the command line as myself, right? I just was born and bred on the command line, and I feel comfortable there. And then there's other engineers that love a GUI, right? And stay in there, right? And so we're moving more and more features into there, so you can get the same experience and same in the 2 places, right? And they're constantly trying to improve the developer experience, right? Working locally, awesome. Seamlessly. Yeah, and then here just recently, past couple weeks, we released 3.0 for desktop. The biggest two major features that are in there is Docker Engine 20.10. So you get all the goodness of the latest and greatest Docker Engine. BuildX is turned on by default. And then we also have Delta, which I'm excited about, is Delta updates. So if your audience is familiar, every time a new version of desktop used to come out, you had to download it, remove the old one, reinstall the new one, right? And make sure you saved images and those type of things.
Right.
Now, and we had two channels. We had the main channel, and then we had an edge channel with more, not beta, but newer features, right? And now we have one, and we do Delta updates. So when you update, the best thing I can equate it to is like VS Code, right? It's just say, hey, you have a new update. Would you like to use that? It restarts, and you have the latest and greatest. Small.
Oh, wow.
Yes, nice smaller deltas, right? So you don't have to download a large file, all those type of things. So that's pretty cool, and it allows us to push out features quickly, and users will be able to use them more quickly. Like Chrome, I don't think, Chrome just updates for me, right? It's just always the latest and greatest.
So we actually do have a question here from the chat. Do these features work with pipelines built with GitHub Actions?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we have one of our Docker captains, Crazy Max is his handle. Kevin's his real name, Crazy Max. He wrote our GitHub Actions, the official Docker GitHub Actions, right? So you can do everything you need to do with containers there. You can build your images, you can push them. He's built in BuildX, build kit. So you get all the benefits of caching and speed and I want to say tree shaking, but it's not. So dependency reconciliation, right, on your builds and stuff like that. So give GitHub Actions. We're really excited about GitHub Actions for sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I guess like you kind of brought up like BuildX. For the viewers who may not know, Peter, do you mind just kind of going over a little bit about what BuildX is?
Yeah, sure. So I'm learning more and more about BuildX every day and the power of it, right? It's a very powerful. But how long ago? I forget how long ago it is, and I'm worried to actually give a date because the internets will correct me. But anyways, a little while ago, the core team started looking at the way Docker build was happening, right? And it wasn't architected and built to be able to handle kind of new features added to it, and it was very tightly coupled. And so they decoupled it, and this is right when Containerd was coming out too. So they used a lot of those kind of architectural principles. So the build kit is kind of a separate Moby project. Docker includes it inside now, but you can use BuildX as a standalone builder. You can also have build notes. You can have multiple build notes. You can do parallel builds and those type of things. The main advantage for the day-to-day developer working locally, building images, the speed is a lot faster. You can do async builds. So you can do multi-stage builds, and BuildKit will look at, okay, if you're building this target, it can walk the dependency tree. So you might have a bunch of targets in your build file, in your Docker file, but one of the targets, the target that you're targeting to build, it will walk that dependency tree and only build those things, as opposed to in the old, you would start at the top and go straight down, right? Every line, everything would get built, and then at the end, if you only use certain bits, right, then everything would just get discarded. With BuildKit, big feature is it can figure out your dependency tree. It can run some of those builds in parallel, so that speeds it up. And then the caching is just a huge improvement, and you can seed caches beforehand and those type of things. So the biggest advantages you get local is just huge speed improvements of your builds. So if you're building your image, running it, find an issue, build it again, right? That loop becomes a lot faster. Yeah.
Nice. And what was it that you were mentioning about the new engine that's I think it was 20.10? I mean, are those the features that are included in the engine itself, or is that more on the desktop? I guess for those that are newer, what is the difference between the engine and the desktop?
Yeah. So the way Docker's architected, right, it's a client server, kind of architecture. So you have the CLI, or the client, you could say, because you can use other clients. And that uses talks over a REST API to the Docker engine that runs kind of as a daemon, and you can open that daemon up to other clients, right? And so Docker right now, when we talk about Docker, it has those two pieces, and so you get the CLI and then the engine. And what desktop does, and of course, containers are primarily for a Linux OS, right? It uses Linux operating system constructs like C groups and namespaces and those type of things.
Right.
And so if you're running on like a Mac or a Windows machine, it's not a Linux OS, so it doesn't have those containerization features to put together. And so what desktop does, it runs a very thin, small virtual machine, right? And it actually runs the engine inside that Linux VM. And then the CLI sits outside of it. So when you interact with Docker, it feels like everything's running local, right? A lot of folks, if you didn't hear that, what I just said, right, you would just think Docker's running on my Mac, right?
Right.
It's running inside of a little VM, and so you're running Linux containers on Mac or on Windows. And that's how you're able to run Linux containers on Windows, right? It's actually a Linux process, right? An OS that's sitting underneath. So that's the big advantage, the difference between, so you have Docker, which is that engine and CLI that kind of work together. Engine runs as a daemon, you have a CLI that sits on top of that. And then Compose, Docker Compose kind of sits as another client. We'll talk to the engine, right?
Right.
And then you have desktop that brings kind of all that together and makes it simple, super easy to get it onto a Mac or a Windows machine. Gives you a nice GUI.
Yeah.
So I think those are the major differences in the way it's architected, and that's why traditionally we haven't had a Linux desktop. So Docker desktop for Linux, right? Because it was just, you ran everything natively and you just use the CLI. But that's one of the major features that the community is asking for, right? A lot of folks are asking for a GUI in Linux to be able to get desktop in Linux.
Wow.
So if you want that, go to our public roadmap and upvote it.
Is that something you go back and check occasionally? Because that's something you're interested personally?
I am. Well, I tell you what, the biggest feature everybody's screaming about is these M1 chips on Apple's hardware. The amount, it was a pretty popular feature request until the actual hardware was dropped. And then as soon as the hardware was dropped and people got their hands on it, it
just went up there.
Skyrocketed, right?
Right.
Yeah, and then just watching the past couple weeks, right, on the keynote, and all the talks on all the compute and new chips you guys are building and all the cool stuff you're doing, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm dying to get some Apple hardware and get ARM images running and stuff. Yeah.
Right. Do you have any special projects that you're thinking of in mind for, or you're just trying it out?
Yeah, just trying it out. No, I don't have anything. I think what's really, getting cheap hardware that runs really fast, right? That's
right. Yeah. It's everyone's dream, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I don't have a certain app, right, that would benefit hugely from that improvement. But other than just running in AWS, right, and running chips, right, for speed and cost, right.
Cool.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess talking about AWS, I know that this is kind of like the last week of reInvent. Are there any things that kind of came out of a reInvent that you in particular are excited about?
Yeah. There's a couple. I think we were talking earlier. The ECS Anywhere and EKS Anywhere is super interesting to me. Really interesting to me. I mean, I think that, and with the Docker integration, right? I'm a little biased there, but I think it's a super easy way to deploy workloads into ECS, which was, and I think I mentioned it earlier. I was surprised to see them using the Docker integration in the demo. This early preview of ECS was really cool. But yeah, super excited about that, right? Because I know friends that work in the EMRs in the medical space, health data space, right? And all those HIPAA laws, and I don't even know them all, where you have to keep data localized or, certain specific rules around that. But being able to run something like EKS anywhere or ECS anywhere, and having that data live in your data center, but still be able to connect in the services that's really cool. It's super cool. But and using all the AWS APIs and look and feel, right? And that's super interesting. What else was interesting? I'm excited about I'm not an ML guy, but I'm, interested in it, a lot more interested in it. And then just seeing all the improvements in the compute power, right? And the prices dropping, especially with prices dropping, then I feel a little more like I can go play around and try and find some real world stuff to build on, which is super cool. And I would say this is probably my number one. Is probably the Lambda containers. Being able to run your containers in Lambda, right, is very, very interesting.
Yeah. Did you think of any use cases off the top of your mind that you'd be like, man, this would be great for that kind of scenario?
Oh, I think just being able to, so a lot of times they have you have your app, right, and you have all these microservices, and they're not, to me, Lambdas or that event based, right? Hey, an event occurred, pick this up, do some processing, and then go away, right? And I might not need you again until tomorrow at midnight again, right?
Right.
I've built tons of applications in the past that have these back-end processes, whatever it is, right? But, at night, pull all the orders out of the queue, process them and something like that, right? So I think Lambda fits perfectly in that. But if you're not there already, but you're running that stuff in containers, a lot of times folks will put them in the same container as your application, right? And you have these two processes. I've done that before. I learned. But being able to pull those out, put them in a container, and things that you already know, right? Like if your whole team is already working in containers, you understand that your CI/CD pipelines are set up, right? And now I can then deploy that container right into a Lambda, right? I mean, I think that's huge, right? I think that's really cool, super cool.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a nice way to kind of segue a little bit or get your feet wet with Lambda, right?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Yeah, and it's kind of, I think great technologies do that, right? They kind of just, they're the level of abstraction, right? They just put another little level of abstraction over it. Doesn't complicate things, but it just makes it that much easier. And then, I can still drop down a level of abstraction and work where I need to, but I can stay up above, right? So if I work in containers and I know containers and I want to leverage, serverless and Lambda, okay, great. Now I got to go change the way I develop. I got to go new tools, right? I got to do, a different paradigm of way I think about developing. Hopefully not, right? You can, I don't think it's seamlessly drop your container in, right? Right. We were talking earlier about offline, but there's just some specifics, but not that hard, right? It's really not that hard, and you configure your image and then drop it right in, and it makes it a lot easier to then start using serverless functions with current code that you have, right?
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
Eugene, did I cut you off, or were you about to say something?
No. Yeah.
Okay.
Which kind of bounce around different kind of reinvent topics, maybe to discussing a little bit about kind of ECS anywhere, or just kind of anything that just wanted to ask Peter about ECS anywhere, see what I guess as all right, I don't want to say the wrong things here, but I think kind of the before and after kind of landscape of deploying things, why is ECS anywhere kind of important from container expert like Peter himself, as we're going into a new decade, right? How is ECS anywhere going to help more people adopt using containers and things like that? So just wanted to bring that question up.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think there's a couple things there, and I touched on some of them before, but I'll try not to repeat myself, I promise. But
sure.
I really loved in the keynote where that distinction was made. Sometimes you come to, I know I talked to a lot of folks, and I was the same when I first came to AWS, right? You kind of jump in the console and drop down the services menu, right? And it's you're just presented with a ton of stuff. and different ways to do things, right? And it's great because you have options, right? But as a noob, right, you might not know where to start or how to get started. I think sometimes there's that question out there of, oh, do I do ECS, do I do EKS, or do I do Lambda, right? What's my route? Or just do I spin up my own EC2 instances and manage my own K8s or Swarm or something like that? And so I think, so having those distinct ECS, then EKS is the two big ones for me, and then EC2, right? Managing my own, jumping from, oh, we need to do containers and we need to do, this digital transformation and we need to move faster and we're, moving to microservices. And then you go, okay, well, we're going to run on Kubernetes. Okay, so now I got to go know all the things Kubernetes, and now I have to be an operator, right? And so you're like halfway through that, you go, no, that's not the right thing. There's this EKS, right? And so you go to EKS, and then you run into, well, I just didn't have to install everything. I still need to know how to manage it, how to keep it up and running, how to write all this YAML. And then you go, okay, well, ECS, maybe that's where I should start. And I would say that's probably one of the best places to start with containers in production, right, is ECS. And then you might run into that barrier, well, that doesn't work for me because I have this data I need localized, right? I need to keep it local. I need to be able to control it. I have my customers that are in Europe, in the EU, that data needs to stay there. We already have a data center, right? I wish I had all this functionality that I could be running locally, right? And then maybe we progress into this hybrid, into AWS, and maybe we find out that it's really not the biggest challenge or concern that we thought. And then you can move into ECS, but it just allows you to progressively move that way. Mm-hmm. And I would suspect, of course, I haven't gotten hands on the ECS stuff yet, but right, if it does its job well enough, then that second step to go full to the cloud probably wouldn't even be needed, right? You run it locally. You don't have to, I know a large computer manufacturing company in here was building their own paths, right, and doing all these things internally because they wanted to keep it all in their data center, with OpenShift and all that type of stuff, right? And that's hard, right? That's hard. If your mainline business is selling widgets, sell widgets, right, and leverage the cloud, and especially if you have those cloud features into your local data center, I mean, that's huge. It's huge, right? Sorry, that was going on for a while there. But
that's fine. And we actually have a question here from chat. Were you able to catch any sessions?
Not that many yet. I mean, to be honest with you, it's hard to watch them during the workday. And
Sure.
A lot of the sessions I'm really interested about are happening like right now. I think it's 6 o'clock. I forget what session it is, but I have it on my calendar. A lot of the container stuff is this week, right?
Yeah. Anyone you're looking forward to? Any interesting titles you're thinking I have to be there?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head.
Putting you on the spot.
But there's a bunch of them.
Sure.
I'll look at my list. Yeah, I want to hear the keynote from this morning. I think I just missed it. Right, it ended at noon my time. Super interested in that keynote of and then the way the replays are working. I don't think I'll get it until later tonight. Okay. But I'm really interested about that. I want to see the deeper dive into EKS Anywhere, ECS Anywhere. Interested in that roadmap. I think there's some roadmap talks around Lambda, containers on Lambda. All three of those big buckets that I'm really interested in. I think there's some roadmap talks around those, some features. So I'm really interested in seeing that.
Great.
I think there was a talk, I forget which one and I forget which functionality, but a customer of yours that's using it now, right? Would love to see that, how their experience with using things. Yeah.
Awesome.
I come more from I come from more the development side and not so much the ops side. So there's a lot of stuff that happened last week and week before that colleagues of mine are super interested in, right? All the new compute is really cool. Oh, another one that I'm really interested in. Are we out of time yet? Or you just let me talk here for 45 minutes?
No. We have time. Let's keep going.
What is it?
Checking the chat here, making sure we have everything.
Yeah.
There's the AWS, of course, everything starts with AWS. Proton, it's not pipelines, but it's Proton. It's the It's the
It's
DevOps.
like the automated management for containers and serverless deployments.
Yes.
Yeah. That was super interesting to me, and I only saw in the keynote. I didn't have time to dig into it, but that looks really interesting, right? With this little bit of setting up stacks from kind of my, DevOps ops team, right? Of configuring, setting everything up, and then giving the engineering dev teams, plug-in points, right? Here's how you can configure things. Choose your stack that fits your microservice or whatever, plug right in, and you have everything set up, kind of standardizing that stuff.
Right.
I think CI/CD is really hard, right? It's
Right.
not continuous integration is a little bit easier. Continuous deployment is tough. Is really tough, right? And so having some of that best practices, reference architectures, and then templates to plug into, I think that's really cool. That's super interesting for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think we've covered all the topics here. So we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. And we really appreciate all your thoughts and all the things that you shared with us. Where is a place that they can come find any of the details we've talked about today? Whether it's about the new UI for Docker Desktop or the engine that's already included in it, or ECS. Is there just a one-stop location that they can go and look up?
Yeah, the best is to go to our community site. So docker.com/community. Get plugged into our community Slack. All of our announcements will go there. And then you can interact with myself. That might not be that exciting, but our engineering teams are there. Our PMs are there, very active in our community channel in Slack. Also, too, almost forgot, we have a development preview program that we had launched it back beginning of the year, but it was very limited, very focused, and we wanted to kind of get it right. And I think we're at there now. Now with the, we're putting a lot of effort into the M1 chip and Apple stuff, so people are really excited about that. But sign up for the developer preview.
Awesome.
And if you are accepted, then you can get a preview of our desktop and really help us fix things, right, and make it the best product we can. But yeah, go to community. It's the best place to go. You'll see all of our events. Get in a community Slack. Sign up for our newsletter. That's kind of your one-stop shop.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Cool.
Well, thank you very much. For everyone that is with us right now, stay tuned. We're going to go ahead and grab an APN ambassador, Josh Lopez, to be able to join us for the next segment of this show. So we'll be right back. But until then, thank you very much for joining us, Peter.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat with you guys. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you.
Hey, we're back, and I'm not Josh. I'm AM. Welcome to me. You've been talking with Eugene and Braden here. We're doing very special episodes of Howdy Partner. If you've never watched the show before, This is Howdy Partner. We are the only show, I think. I keep saying the only show. I think we are the only show dedicated to AWS partners in the AWS Partner Network. And what that means is people just like Peter from Docker, right? So we've got two categories of partners that we work alongside of. One is ISV partners. So these are companies that build and sell software, right? Just like Docker. We also have another category, right? Right, Braden and Eugene?
That's right.
Yeah. SIs.
Yeah, we got SIs or consulting partners, and that's who we're about to talk with. I'm stalling for time here. I want to be totally upfront with all of you out in there in the Twitch audience. Josh hasn't arrived quite yet, so you get me. And I thought we would come on, tell you a little bit about the APN, maybe talk through some of our hot takes on the reInvent announcements, right? But yeah, so consulting partners. Josh is a member of a consulting partner for AWS, and he is actually what's called an APN ambassador too. So he's got some very unique perspective on working within the AWS partner network that we're going to get to hear about. But first, before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to you two. I'm going to put you both in the hot seat like you just put Peter.
Sure.
What announcements are you excited about? Let's start with Eugene. What are you excited about?
So I think we talked a little about this like earlier, and I would say I was pretty not surprised, or I guess like surprised is like a good word. I was surprised in Andy's keynote talk about like the different features that Amazon Connect is going to have. I think as like, and so for those of you who don't know, Amazon Connect is our service that helps like connect like, callers, like retail callers to forward onto like, different like agents and different like, contact routes, things like that. So basically, like when you call Xfinity and they have like an automated voice message and kind of like telling you where to go, that's what Amazon Connect like does for our customers. And so I guess like the reason why I'm a little bit surprised that it made it to like Andy's like keynote is that if Andy's talking about it, it's probably a pretty big thing behind the scenes. And I think like, as technologists, people who were kind of used to developing on the cloud native, so to speak, we don't like, I think the younger generation like don't really have like that idea of kind of using like phone calls, right? Like, I mean, we'll call in for customer support like when we need to, but usually like we kind of want everything to be like abstracted. We want to just email a kind of a ticket, let us know like when something happens, so on and so forth. And for Andy to kind of like talk about like more features being added, kind of makes me it's a reality check. It's grounding me to say that a lot of companies still aren't like on the cloud, still are kind of like using like, legacy systems like IVR systems, and there's a lot of room to help these customers. And so that to me was kind of like it's not like the new cutting edge like technology is like kind of talking about like the new Mac OSs being, or new like some of the new Mac OS like EC2 instances, but to me that was kind of like a reality check. So yeah.
I love that you played the millennial, zennial, Gen Z card there. I was
trying to walk around there.
You were just like, you know what? Don't you dare make me call you, okay? Text only, and even that is too much. Like, just send me.
You gotta apply AI/ML to already understand my needs before I even recognize them.
That's right. Just put it in a TikTok video, and hopefully I will get your message, right, at some point.
Yeah.
It has to go viral first, and then it'll get to Eugene, yeah?
That's how you make yourself sound like the oldest person on the street, by saying, put it in a TikTok video. All right, so cool. Yeah, I think that's sufficiently a hot take right there. Eugene, that's a good one. I wanted to call out too, since we are talking partners, there was the partner keynote, what was it, week 1, I think, with Doug, and there was some and Sandy Carter too on the public sector side. There were some interesting announcements there. We had the what was it, travel and hospitality competency launch.
Yep.
Yeah. Some interesting things. I wanted to bring that up because I want you all to talk with Josh about that. I think, again, unique perspective, being an APN ambassador, caring about the things that happen with the APN specifically that aren't always surfaced, I would say, to the greater AWS audience, right? The people that are here for, Lambda and ECS and EKS. So, I think I heard a little notification in my ear that Josh has joined us. So I will stop rambling. We didn't get to your hot takes,
That's okay.
Braden, but you can share those with Josh in just a few moments. Let's get him set up, and we will be right back.
Wonderful.
Once again, we're back live with Braden for Howdy Partner. Go ahead, Braden.
Hey, everybody, we're back, and we have Josh from Versent with us. Now, as AM was able to let us in a little bit ago, an iSide partner are the consultants that work with AWS to be able to implement solutions. So, Josh, can you tell us a little bit about Versent and the work that you all have been doing recently?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. So Versent was formed 6 years ago. We had three founders, Tor, James, and Eddie. We've sort of fast forward 6 years, we're now 400 people, predominantly based in Australia, so all the major cities in Australia. We have expanded out into Singapore and have also an office in Denver. For us, as a consulting partner, we have also started down the product line. So we do have a product called Stacks that we are building. Think landing zones, but think enterprise landing zones. That's really what that product is there to solve. For us, as a consulting partner, we've kind of got 6 practices. So we started off with cloud adoption, DevOps, and security, but now we've sort of expanded that out to data and analytics, digital, as well as app modernization. So really sort of that full stack. And one thing to note, we're an exclusive AWS partner. So all of our engineers and all the work that we do is specifically focused in on AWS, and it really sort of makes sure that we're really focusing in on being what we call, our CEO calls it the heart surgeons of AWS. So
Sure.
these sort of specialists in anything sort of AWS.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that, you mentioned that you've worked with quite a few different companies. What are some of the great outcomes of 2020? Any great customer outcomes that Versant's been able to experience or deliver that you'd like to be able to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll probably start with one of the really key outcomes that we sort of delivered this year, which was with Flybuys. So Flybuys is a loyalty and rewards company which were being sort of or demerged from their parent company. So they really needed to go on a full transformation, looking at sort of cloud first. So we partnered with them over a sort of 12-month period to really sort of start off building out their solid or secure cloud foundations. So that's where Stacks was used to sort of lay the foundations in terms of, you can think about the well-architected sort of account structure, as well as all of the controls in place. We're able to spin that up in 24 hours using Stacks to then really accelerate what they really wanted to do. They've got 9 million customers, so you can just think about the breadth of scale for them. So we worked with Ping Identity to really look at the strategy around identity. So they had around about, so as you said, 9 million customers. You can think about the data that they had around their sort of data warehousing. So we moved all of that into AWS, partnering with an ISV, Snowflake. So we're able to put the data lake in place for them. But the key bit for them was considering they're actually standing up their own and like sort of modernizing their IT. We had to, and they really wanted to push the envelope with automation. So for them, it was a matter of obviously shifting and moving to the cloud, but really focusing in on sort of the best practices around automation. So we brought a team together, and over 12 months, we're able to fully transform their business, provide them with a fresh new landing zone on Stacks. We're able to then have their data lake on Snowflake, and then all of the member identities within actually Ping. So 9 million sort of identities transferred across. And now they're sort of working at scale. So we finished that in April, and it was a great sort of testament. It's a public case study, and one that we're really proud of to sort of work with them and partner with them through that journey. So they've got, the thing with them is they've got a lot of merchants that they deal with. So now with the automation that we've put in, Stacks being able to sort of allow them to integrate a lot quicker, it's really just giving them that velocity. So it's probably one of the key outcomes. Another one I'll probably talk about is the Land Services South Australia. So they were a public sector customer we work with. They were also being privatized. And for them, they actually, in terms of their architecture, so they had Oracle Enterprise Edition for their database. Their app was written in Oracle JDK, so a lot of Java in terms of Oracle JDK. And then they had all of their infrastructure on IBM Red Hat. So they challenged us to say, well, we don't really want to be bringing along licensing when we go to our cloud journey. So they were hosting all of their infrastructure on premises. So we then worked with them, built that secure landing zone, but then really focused in on moving them away from that enterprise license. So it was Oracle Enterprise Edition. We moved to the RDS for Postgres. We sort of transformed their applications from sort of being dependent on Oracle JDK to Amazon Corretto, and then moved Red Hat across to Amazon Linux. So then they were able to really get a massive cost optimization win there, not having to bring those licensing with them. And then alongside that, we really focused in on, again, DevOps principles. They were able to, before they were sort of really not able to do blue-green deployments. So we were able to now bring that to the table around doing blue-green deployments for some of their key applications, and really wrapping the sort of DevOps principles that we know when moving to the cloud. And for them, that was kind of key. So stripping away that enterprise licensing and really folding in sort of those DevOps practices. So they're probably two of the key outcomes. We are working one which is not a public case study, but I sort of will talk about it. They're in the entertainment and cinema business, and they're a customer obviously affected in this year quite significantly, but they've actually taken the opportunity to transform their business. So they're going all in on cloud and really sort of working with us to sort of accelerate that adoption of AWS and really sort of start the year next year with a fully transformed infrastructure away from being on-prem to being in the cloud, and using this opportunity to sort of the period that we've had to really sort of accelerate themselves next year. So some really, really awesome outcomes over this year for us, and we're really happy to continue to partner with customers to sort of get them on that sort of cloud adoption journey.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Those are some massive outcomes. Wow.
Yeah. So I think, for me, I like working with SI partners. Like, we kind of discuss a lot about like kind of operational like handover, and so like you were kind of alluding to earlier, right? If your CEO is kind of saying like, Versent want like we're the heart surgeons of like AWS, how do you kind of to help customers to adopt or to migrate into the cloud? I guess like what what does Versent do to kind of enable them, that once you have done your thing to help them migrate over, how do you teach them like the best practice like you've learned, and like, you know, the systems that you created, that you've helped them create, I mean, I think in some ways, like, you probably know better than them. So how do you kind of transfer that knowledge, and how do you kind of get them to keep learning? Because, I mean, we're talking in the third week of reInvent, right? Like, there's always like new things kind of coming out. And so how do you kind of stay on top of that? And just kind of talk about that process.
Yeah, so for us, we've got one thing I didn't mention. We've got a managed services team, so Versent Managed Services, VMS, and for those two customers that I spoke about, they've partnered with our managed services team to continue that journey on. So for us, we understand that when you accelerate a customer into AWS, we are the heart surgeons, but we don't expect them to be, and it takes time for that customer to come along that journey. So for us, they partner up with our managed services team to allow them to have within the managed services team, there actually is a concept called teach to fish. So we really sort of work with their teams to actually teach them to fish, because ultimately we, as a managed services team, don't want to be there forever. We really want to get them on that, take them on that journey to actually really sort of understand what's been built, and really operate the what we've kind of built ongoing. So the managed services team really sort of is in partnership with the customer to give them the ability to have that time to scale up their teams. We really focus in on sort of that the pair programming side of things, because unless you sort of actually get involved with the platform, it's hard to actually get the knowledge. So and specifically, as you said, right, with reInvent coming, with all of the service announcements that we've had, there's so much to sort of keep on top of, and that's where our Versent Managed Services team actually take on those and really sort of embed those into our customers to continue that journey. So as a cloud adoption practice, which I run, we sort of allow the customer to get that fast pace into AWS, and then our managed services team really helps them on that journey, really sort of focusing in on sort of the cost optimization, really continuing that transformation for them as well. So it's that partnership will continue.
Awesome.
That's incredible. That's awesome that you all are able to teach to fish, right? I've heard that's probably one of the biggest problems when trying to migrate or do any sort of adoption or migration is not so much the coordination of all the efforts, which is huge, by the way. That undertaking is huge, but something that's long lasting sometimes can be overlooked is making sure that there's sustainability and talents, making sure that those that stay behind are able to maintain that and still maintain the best practices on top of that, not just keep it at a minimum, but still be able to do that at a high level. So given that you all are already addressing that biggest learning curve or that biggest challenge, what would you say was the biggest challenge shared between those 2 or 3 use cases that you were just telling us about?
Yeah, I'd probably say biggest challenge I talked to sort of the land services South Australia. They hold, in terms of the customer stuff, they hold all of the land titles for all of the states. So in terms of the data you can think about is very, very sensitive. And as well as the fact that the time frame that they were given was really only 6 months to move off all their infrastructure and as well transform, get off Oracle JDK, as well as remove the Red Hat sort of bear. So for us, that it was as well as maintaining the amount of data that they had. So you can think in the order of around sort of 100 terabytes of data to be moved in that time, plus all of the freedom away from licensing. Also to make sure that they're able to continue and really sort of push the boundaries for them around the CIO. It really made sure that transfer wasn't really just going to be a lift and shift. It was a transformation for them. But the key bit for them as well, I think what we just spoke about, was that teach to fish. So they wanted to be embedded within the team. They didn't want the migration to be done to them. They wanted to be part of it. And that was a piece as well, is to make them part of the actual migration, work within our pods, really sort of understand the concepts that we're sort of working with them to do as well. So our engineers paired up with their engineers to sort of uplift, and CloudFormation was brand new for them in terms of that concept. This doesn't exist for them on-prem. So for that, it's really sort of getting them to sort of understand that automation as well as all the services. So you can imagine we sort of talk about them so freely in terms of all the services, that 175 plus now with all the service announcements, to get them educated on what really is a well-architected view for actual a workload. And we're well-architected partners, and that's a mechanism that we use throughout that migration as well. So continually doing well-architected reviews. We did it prior to the migration, during the migration, and continually actually fold that into our managed services practice as well, to really sort of show them the evolution that their landscape will take. And in terms of probably I think that the challenge really was around, just the uplifters of people. We tend to focus quite a lot on the technical challenges, right? But technical challenges can be solved, but really making sure that people are taken on the journey is the real key thing. And ultimately, people that are sort of brand new to a full platform like AWS, really sort of, you need to spend time, walk them through. We as well as during our engagements, we typically run brown bags as well to sort of take them sort of like mini immersion days to really sort of get them immersed into the new concepts they're going to be seeing throughout when they sort of come to actually operate the platform. So it's sort of folding in that as well, and really it's not just focusing in on the tech, but really focusing in on the people as well to really solve those, to make sure, you're right, that they're actually going to be able to operate this going forward.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think like kind of adding on to what Josh was saying, kind of want to differentiate or kind of want to go in a little bit on some of the items. I think like the idea of having people adopt ideas, like people adopting ideas, is really important. For example, like if you help a customer, if you create a CI/CD pipeline for them, right, they're going to be like, yay. Everything is great. We can deploy things like you were saying. Like we now have blue-green deployment. We have canary deployment. We have all different types of deployment options. That's great. But the idea of CI/CD, it's kind of is a little bit meta. It's the idea that you're trying to improve how you continuously integrate, continuously deploy. But the thing is, like, just because you have a CI/CD pipeline, doesn't really mean that like that's it. You want to find like different ways to improve it. So like, and so to kind of just like give like a nod to our guest Peter earlier from Docker, they have added like capabilities such as like security scanning, like image scanning, as part of like their CI/CD pipeline. And so I think the idea of actually adopting, I don't know, the idea of adopting like the principles of continuously improving your platform, I think it's a really hard thing to do, but it's a very necessary thing to do.
Right.
Oh, absolutely, and like. Obviously, they're a big Java customer, so CodeGuru now actually supports Java, and so that was something we folded in, and as well as the fact that a lot of the automation that we write as well is in Python. So glad that CodeGuru is also supporting Python as well. So it's a matter of, you're right, improving that CI/CD pipeline. It's one thing. Is it's not just a matter of it's just going to deploy the code. There's static code analysis. It's improving the code coverage. It's really looking at sort of how you can really improve that so you can get the resiliency that you need. And that's kind of where we find that continuous well-architected reviews. As we can sort of start to see the actual workload evolve, that's where we start to really sort of fold in those improvements, and that's where our sort of managed services team comes in. We'll obviously hand that across to them. They're going to work with the customers, say, well, let's sort of see where we can actually improve the CI/CD pipeline, and even out the back of that, in terms of Werner spoke about logging and monitoring quite significantly yesterday in keynote, and that's one of those things that it's so key to have the metrics that you need as well once you deploy, to make sure that if things do go wrong, you've actually got a chance to sort of roll back. You're not actually pushing out sort of errors straight into production.
Yeah. Something I'll call out that I really am glad that Versent does is doing well architecture reviews frequently, not just a once a year thing, maybe not even once at the beginning of the product, because as you said, with migrations, with adoption, cloud adoption, the landscape is constantly changing. So being able to do a pulse check on a frequent basis, not just at the beginning, is very important, because you don't know when you accidentally open an S3 bucket or you set up a service that you're not familiar with and you're kind of getting started on. And so being able to go through that well architecture review really does save you some heartache and mistakes, because like you were saying, it's a constantly changing landscape throughout that process.
Yeah, and this is where we sort of see opportunities for new services that have been announced to then be potentially introduced, and that's really key for us, is to really keep on top of services that And the well-architected review for us is a really, really beneficial tool to sort of introduce that across the specific pillars. And there are services that we'll definitely be trying to introduce once they become out of preview. One of them probably being Babblefish for Aurora Postgres. That's a huge one for us. We do a lot of work with customers around sort of SQL Server, and to have the potential to remove that or to sort of reduce that licensing. We're sort of working with a customer at the moment, and a significant amount of their TCO is licensing. So services like that, and obviously we're really sort of a key bit of the cost optimization pillar is sort of looking at potentials around how we can sort of re-architect it to sort of allow for customers to continue on that journey of really getting to a point where they can operate as efficiently as possible.
Right. And for those who aren't familiar with Babblefish, could you tell us a little bit about your experience with it and how you've been able to leverage it? You mentioned, migration to Aurora. Could you just dive a little bit more into that for us?
Yeah, so Babblefish for Postgres is currently still in preview. I've asked for it to be whitelisted so that we can get our hands dirty. But just a brief overview for it is allowing for customers to run SQL Server on the Aurora Postgres engine. It does sort of allows you to run both your T-SQL as well as your it does a translation. So it pretty much you can actually port across your SQL Server databases now into Aurora. The great thing there is that you're not paying for the SQL Server license. So the pathway for that is just phenomenal in terms of being able to not do a major transformation of your database, because before Babblefish, it was you'd have to look at MySQL because that was the pathway. But now you can actually take the database itself and host it specifically on Aurora Postgres. And the key bit there is it's really sort of coupled with the schema conversion tool, which will provide you with some adjustments to the actual schema itself, and then the database migration service will allow you to sort of migrate straight into Aurora Postgres. So I'm super keen to test it out with. So we've got quite a few customers, and we've got some in-flight migrations that as soon as it becomes GA, we're really going to sort of see if we can test the envelope to say that that's a huge win. Like if you think about it, there was a customer that we're working with that's 30% of their TCO is just SQL Server licensing. So doing that is going to be huge for them. Yeah. In terms of what I spoke about around sort of LAN services, that was a move from Oracle Enterprise to the relational database service for Postgres. So that's a bit more of an easier pathway in terms of they both have PL SQL as the translation. Really, we have specific skills within Versent itself we put on sort of database engineers that actually that's their sort of bread and butter, and we're able to do that translation and really work with the customer to make sure that there wasn't any real impact. We did sort of look at Aurora Postgres, but Postgres for RDS seemed to be the real good fit for it. There were some limitations that we found. So regardless, we were still able to remove that Oracle Enterprise Edition. There were obviously, it is really key to sort of plan that out. It's not a matter of you can do it in a day. So there are tools available. So the schema conversion tool was key for that. It can be run on the actual database engine itself, and does give you recommendations. So we use that. We use the database migration service to then assist with the migration of the data across into the target accounts. And it was a massive win. Again, a huge cost optimization. You can just imagine what Oracle Enterprise licenses cost, and to be then not having to pay that with Postgres is key. So,
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I have one question. There is a question from the audience that I'll just kind of like say out loud. Like they're interested in kind of like knowing what the current state of the cloud is. I think what we were kind of talking about earlier is like the landscape, right? About how as like, even though we're like, we're all technologists, like we are all pretty like quote unquote like cloud native, there's still a lot of companies like around the world that are still kind of like inching their way towards cloud adoption. And so, but before I think like we get to that question, sorry, Alex, I kind of want to ask, like the idea of like not just like in that 12-month time span that you had with like Flyby, what is really like, you said that it wasn't just like a lift and shift migration. And so for those who don't know, lift and shift, like you hardly really change any like the application itself. For example, like if you have like an application, you're just kind of hosting it out EC2, like on an EC2 instance instead of your on-prem data center. And it kind of instead like transfer. Can you kind of like walk us through like that transformation process? Because like there's a lot of work, and I think hitting all of that, like moving 100 terabytes of data in 12 months, and like doing all the operation training and all that. I think we're not talking about that enough. So I'm gonna let you take the floor with that.
Yeah, sure. So yes, specifically with Flybuys, they also wanted to push the envelope with containers. So the platform, the container orchestration platform that we used there was EKS. So for those that don't know, that's the Elastic Kubernetes service. So for them, they obviously, when the infrastructure they were hosting was actually on like instances themselves in terms of servers, virtual servers on premises, but they didn't want to take that up into AWS. So they looked at that specific opportunity, that transformation opportunity to move to containers. Now that's quite a significant step. The CIO at the time really wanted to push the envelope for that as well. So they've moved from running on virtual servers to then changing their operating model to actually run on containers. That really sort of helped them, one, from a TCO, so a total cost of ownership, so not having to run virtual servers as they were, they can now run containers. It really then uplifted their people to start thinking differently around, rather than just hosting on a specific virtual server, to now looking at, and we just had Docker before this, to look at, Dockerizing their applications, really looking at sort of how they can improve that and actually improve the developer experience as well. So using containers really improve the developer experience, allow them to sort of transform a lot of their core applications onto that container orchestration platforms. It gave them the scale that they needed as well. So rather than sort of scaling out what they would have had to do if they did a lift and shift straight to an EC2 instance and then sort of scaling out like instances, now they can scale out the EKS cluster and have containers that really represent their core business. The other thing that they looked at was some ISV like Snowflake in terms of moving that 9 million user base in terms of all the data that comes along with it as well. So utilizing sort of ISVs as well in the market to actually accelerate that journey, as well as ping identity around that sort of. They had, you can imagine, if you got 9 million identities to because they're all individual users, to sort of manage that as well. So they partnered with us to sort of get that ecosystem all laid out. But ultimately, you said, that the key bit is with all of this new technology that comes along with moving to AWS, be it EKS, be it all of the serverless services that come along with it, plus the extra sort of ISVs, there is a lot of work that does come into the actual people and process. So we do work significantly with a customer throughout the journey to uplift them. And we've got an advisory practice that does that and works with the customer to get them across what we're actually building, across the architecture, across the design decisions that we've made, make sure that they're all coming along with that journey as well, and uplifting their architects as well, because their architects typically have that on-premises mindset, but really changing their architecture, what really it is to do a well-architected workload within AWS and what that actually really means. Mm-hmm. And then their operational staff. If you've gone from running virtual servers on-premises to running containers and running a lot of serverless services, that's a completely different operating model as well. And a lot of the time, they actually it does save them a lot of time and a lot of pain. They're not having to do get woken up at night as well, in terms of that old traditional model of how things run when it's on premises. So the piece around making sure that we've got that clear understanding around that, the new operating model that does sort of work with when you're moving into AWS is key. But the key bit is just taking the customer on the journey. Right. There is like explaining the whole process. We do a lot of workshops at the start of an engagement to get them across and really get their buy-in around that, where we don't come with a prefabricated design. It's actually working with their architects, working with their people. Similarly with their operations, we bring kind of everyone along the journey. And it's not actually just technology. It's people from procurement, it's people from legal, it's people from the business, it's everyone that's part of that as well. Because what you don't really want to do is sort of finish the journey, and there are people that are unaware that they've actually just gone they've taken on AWS, and there are people that are sort of affected on the periphery that you want to sort of be involved at the start so that they can come along with that as well. So that's key for us is just that high sort of heightened engagement that we have across the entire organization, because it's an organizational change when moving from on-premises to AWS.
So yeah, I actually kind of like that that you're saying that it's an organizational change. I believe it was last year's reInvent at Andy Jassy's keynote, where like one of the kind of the requirements of really cloud adoption is top to bottom like agreement, right? Like you got to get the CEO to buy in, you got to get the like the leadership team to all buy in. Otherwise, like if there's some people that are like then they're not going to want to learn. They're not going to pay attention during the workshops. They're not going to adopt the principles, and then when there is like a new platform, it's going to be half baked. It's not going to work the way it could optimize to be working. So anyways, I thank you. I just wanted to kind of point that out. So yeah, I do want to kind of go back to Alex's question and from the comments, and he was just kind of saying he doesn't really know anything about the current state of cloud adoption in Australia. And so wanted to kind of just pick your brains about like, what is the like the corporate landscape like in terms of cloud adoption? Are there any percentages that you can kind of give us, or any kind of like ballpark numbers, or just anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with an amazing announcement from reInvent, which was the announcement of the Melbourne region. So that's one piece that we've been waiting for a long time. So that's now obviously on the roadmap. So that's amazing to see that. It's kind of validation around AWS's understanding of Australia now starting to be really a player in the cloud market. So obviously we've had the Sydney region for 8 years now, and then now we're having a second region. In terms of across the industries, we're starting to see an acceleration within Australia. It is still quite heavy in terms of the enterprise landscape. So if you can think about sort of a lot of commercial off-the-shelf products have been bought, but customers are now starting to shift to really sort of change that landscape of running commercial off-the-shelf products within AWS on an EC2 instance to actually really sort of pushing the boundaries around containers. So we are seeing a lot of the enterprise customers that we're working with looking at EKS, looking at Fargate, looking at like container actually orchestration platforms rather than the traditional way of running your enterprises, just buying a commercial off-the-shelf product. It is quite, in terms of the landscape within Australia, it is quite, in terms of the enterprise, quite Windows based. So a lot of customers that we deal with have a lot of Windows servers. We've moved thousands of Windows servers into AWS, but that now with the options of running .NET Core on ECS, and really sort of even Lambda having sort of .NET Core as an option, is also pushing the boundaries. There's a thing which is called app to container, which is a service offered by AWS to really move your apps into containers as well. So what we're starting to see is customers really shifting away from that traditional view of just running an instance to actually looking at really how they can actually optimize their landscape and run on containers. There isn't a huge push around, like, so we are seeing some customers push the boundaries around full serverless capability. So obviously a lot of the greenfield startups are using that, considering you're sort of starting from scratch. But in Australia, a lot of the sort of banks and public sector have got a bit of legacy behind, and sort of push them all the way through to sort of running completely serverless applications is still sort of coming through. But we are starting to see it as well as they start to sort of evolve their technology. We do have a lot of customers, or a lot of the banks running mainframes. So I think there was an announcement around a mainframe competency as well. So they are looking to sort of shift that, because ultimately those within the Australian market, those mainframes have been running since the 70s. They obviously still are part, and they're a core part of the customer landscape. So to be able to sort of displace them and really sort of start to look at advanced architectures for that is going to be key. And if you can think about Australia, like sort of the West Coast for us is predominantly mining companies. So a lot of mining companies in the West Coast, and then on the East Coast we've got a lot of our big banks and government customers. So that's kind of the spread. And Australia's quite a significant, like a large kind of country. Like we do see in terms of the West Coast, there is actually unfortunately an 80 or 100 millisecond round trip from our customers to the Sydney region. So they've always been wanting a region in Perth, because you really can't speed up the speed of light. But it's one of those things we are starting to see a lot of that there. And for them, there's probably a lot where they're looking at outposts and local zones as well as an option, or more local zones in terms of if they can get that, but outposts specifically for the mining companies, considering they're so remote. And then from the East Coast, as I said, there's a lot of, in terms of the enterprise, sort of fits in that sort of public sector, and as well as the financial sector sort of on the East Coast.
Great. So with that, I think you kind of hit on a question that I had. So we talked a little bit about the landscape of cloud in Australia. I was curious to see, you've been able to help quite a few big clients or customers be able to adopt the cloud. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? We've addressed the challenges. You've addressed how you're bringing a lot of people or stakeholders to the table, and not just the ones that you typically think of, but you were saying legal, finance, all of the departments to make sure everyone's on board. You're addressing a lot of the big challenges that stump a lot of huge projects, and I think it's exactly why you've all been able to get these projects going in as short as 6 months. So I am curious, what are the trends that you're seeing, outside of the challenges? What are the trends that you're seeing with cloud adoption that aren't necessarily being addressed yet, but you're starting to really focus on and realize, what, once we do this, we could be even faster?
Yeah, sure. So I think for us, in terms of making sure, from a cloud adoption standpoint, is how can we get the customer in terms of, from the traditional standpoint, we see a lot of customers obviously going from on-premises to AWS, but it's from there to then utilize the sort of far right. If we talk about containers and serverless, how can we accelerate that adoption? So, because what we don't want to see is sort of customers adopt the cloud, and then that's kind of it for them in terms of hosting on EC2 instances. So for us, it's accelerating and how we can make sure that we can get them as close to a serverless landscape as possible, and really accelerate that. So there are services coming out that will help with that. The other one as well is cost. I think cost is really a key driver for more so cost optimization. So I guess the land services for South Australia was a key one around sort of freedom of enterprise licenses, moving on to open source. So that's a shift that we are starting to see as well, is to how customers in Australia can actually move away from the enterprise licenses that they've had for years and years and years, and move to sort of more open source. And the thing with them is that we're starting to see a lot of customers, obviously the technology in terms of the people that are coming through from university are wanting to work on open source. They're wanting to work on containers. They're not wanting to sort of work on old traditional infrastructure. So it's really making sure that they've also got the ability to attract the talent that they want to accelerate their sort of customer journey as well. And that's the key bit, I think. So cost optimization, getting them as close to and as quick as possible to sort of adopting what we would say is cloud native services within AWS, and then also making sure that they can attract the talent as well.
Awesome, thank you. And we do have a question in the chat here. Let's pull it up here. I think the chat here is, what has your journey been to get to where you are now as a solutions architect? I mean, I guess you could easily identify as a solutions architect. So they wanted to see what that journey was like for you.
Yeah, so I started in the industry 16 years ago now, as a performance tester. So I sort of straight out of pretty much I studied software engineering at university. I sort of started it as a performance tester, and that I guess really sort of started my journey. And then I moved into I was a Java developer for quite some time. So spent a bit of time on some of the technologies that no longer exist in terms of service-oriented architecture, which has obviously moved into microservices. I then moved into infrastructure. So I moved to Japan and worked a few years in Japan, migrating data centers within Japan itself. And that was one probably key bit, is I would say that the journey around sort of seeing how different cultures work in terms of within IT was just eye-opening. And that was probably one of the best experiences I've had so far. And then coming back from that, I then joined Versent. I've been working on AWS for about six years now, and ultimately, I guess the pathway from there is to continue to be curious. That you're really in my journey from 16 years ago as a performance tester to now, I've never stopped learning. So it's one of those things to continually learn. Always sort of, I find that I'm also sort of passionate about IoT as well. So just doing some small IoT projects to sort of get into sort of services that you would probably not normally use on a day-to-day basis, but really sort of evolving through that. And ultimately for me, it was, just again, continuing to be curious around how better I can sort of architect solutions. And I've been I've been a solution architect now for about better part of 10 years. And seeing the industry evolve, and as I said, it's going to continually evolve now, and it's great to see. Again, from reInvent, it's one of those things you go, okay, I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks now relearning a lot of the things that I've sort of spent years sort of working on.
Sure. Absolutely. I love that idea, that just continue to learn and be curious, right? Obviously that's a big leadership principle for us at Amazon, and obviously it applies to anyone regardless of where they're at. You know, being able to see where you are now and realize, you know what, there's something out there that I don't know, but I would love to be able to just understand how it works. And you know, before you know it, that technology ends up taking off, and you can actually start to raise your hand in meetings and be like, actually, I already kind of have a background in that. Let me go ahead and lead this. And so to be able to add on to that question there, Game Day, you know, that's a great way to become an SA, is just constantly be learning something new, as Josh was able to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess internally within Versent, we run sort of in part of the practice, we run weekly brown bags. So it's really one of those things to continually allow for our people internally to sort of, and it's across all services within AWS, because what we find is the way to learn is to sort of have that opportunity to sort of showcase a small segment every sort of Friday within our people, to say, well, whether it be new service announcements or a passion that someone has. And that's key, I think, to sort of get that collaboration as well, because you're not going to know everything, and someone is obviously, as I said, has expertise in another area, and that's the best way to learn as well. It's just to get like-minded people together and really sort of push the boundaries.
Yeah, and I see a question here, Eugene. What about your path? And then I'll get to mine. Well, let's hear Eugene's path real quick.
I would say mine is like non-traditional, but I feel like that is going to, like, my path is going to be kind of the norm in, like, you know, the future. But I did not go to college for a degree in CS. I was actually trying to get into med school. So that didn't kind of like really pan out, because I've never really tried anything else. And I've always been interested in technology, but I say that because I, like, you know, used to build like PCs because I like playing video games and so on and so on. But then, like, you know, I took a couple like CS classes in college, and I loved building something, right? And also kind of like the idea of, like, you know, it's at its root, a lot of things is problem solving. It's just a different medium of what you're trying to do. And so I went to a boot camp, a coding boot camp, and I was luckily able to get a job as a developer at Expedia, my last company. And so that has been like a really good opportunity to kind of, like, you know, like, you know, program at like an enterprise level. And I think coming on to being like an SA here, it was just because I just started doing, you know, it was actually, it was somewhat of a cloud migration project that I did at Expedia that kind of led me to where I am at AWS. And yeah, and I would say, like, you know, I completely agree with Josh. You have to always be learning. So reInvent happens every year because there's always new things. And there's always, like, you know, once you've gotten used to certain, like, you know, platforms, you're like, your mind automatically thinks, hey, like, isn't there a way to automate this, or isn't there like a way to make this better, optimize this? And so that's kind of why you always have to kind of be learning. And I think one other thing, though, is I think one of the cool things about being an SA, and I think Josh might be able to attest to this, and Brandon as well, is that, like, you're helping customers help their customers. And for me, I'm pretty big on, you know, customer success. Like, you know, being able to help build or architect or optimize or whatever, like whatever verb, a product that will serve people, either in the healthcare industry, or you're in, like, you know, the West Coast of Australia and you're like really into mining, helping those people make their lives easier, right? I think it's just really cool. So that's kind of my journey.
Awesome. And then I'll
I'm gonna toss it to you, Braden.
Yeah, real quickly. Mine was somewhat simple. I usually used the role that I was in wherever I was to be able to learn adjacent skills. And so my first tech job was actually building dashboards for Tableau. And you know, for a while, it was great to be able to help the business make great decisions. But then I realized, you know what, like, where's this information coming from? And I would ask my boss, hey, why don't I go ahead and grab the data for you instead of you having to query it and give it to me? I'll go ahead and get it. And so that's how I kind of started my journey in databases, or my experience in databases. And so with every job, I would actually volunteer to do a little bit of extra work that was a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And I was able to gather enough of the experience in all these different areas to be well versed to become an SA. And so that's how mine's a little bit more general and more generic, but that it kind of lends itself, or is more of an example of how to learn and be curious constantly, even in a role, or even when you're already in a role that you feel is good for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for the question, Game Day. So Josh, I did want to ask you mentioned earlier about the products that Versent's been building in order to accelerate cloud adoption into AWS. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those products?
Yeah, sure. So Stacks, obviously, it started off as a cost and compliance product that we built about 3 years ago. And that was specifically really focusing in on sort of understanding where there was cost optimization opportunities within AWS, and also aligning to how we can really maintain a compliance sort of stance within AWS. Now that's actually expanded out, and we've been working with customers sort of building out what we call enterprise native cloud, but you can think of it as like enterprise landing zones. I think every partner has gone through that, has their own IP. AWS has launched landing zones. So we sort of had 4 years of doing that with quite a lot of customers. So our CEO decided to actually couple that within the Stacks product, and now that actually is an offering from Stacks. So it's something that would normally take weeks can actually take hours to actually have a pretty much a landing zone with associated to the web architecture framework. So you can think of the audit account logging, sort of a security account, to really accelerate that customer adoption, so that customers don't actually have to worry about the foundation. They can really just worry about what they need to host on AWS. The thing which I really sort of love about the product as well is it's sort of combined. So it's providing you with a landing zone which has all of the controls baked into it already. So it's consistently, every time you create an account, they've got that consistency rolled in. It's aligned to the CI/CD benchmark already. So all the controls that are needed for that. You've got compliance bundles that you can add. So within Australia, we've got a regulator called APRA, but there's also HIPAA and PCI. So if there are specific regulatory requirements that you need to sort of adhere to, you've got that available. And then the other thing that they've just released is the networking hub. So I know that for us, as SAs, it kind of rolls off the tongue around transit gateway and all of the things that really sort of come VPCs, all those constructs. But if you're sort of new to AWS, a lot of those really sort of take time to understand. So that's part of the product as well, rolling a networking hub straight into the actual enterprise landing zone itself. And for us, we've used that so across it went GA in May. So for us, it's really sort of pushing the boundaries there. There's a lot of stuff on the roadmap, but it's really coupling all of our expertise together into a product that we can now offer to our customers to accelerate that. Because ultimately, we don't want to be focusing in on. We want to make sure that you've got secure foundations in place before you host, obviously, your workloads in, but we don't want to be spending weeks doing that. We really want to accelerate that, and that's kind of the vision for that product. So if you do want to check it out, stacks.io. And for us, it's just seeing sort of great wins for that. So Flybys obviously was a customer that uses that product, and they're able to have confidence when they're spinning up accounts, to be able to just have everything baked in and not have to worry about it, and they can actually then sort of start focusing in on that workload. It's all API driven, following obviously best practices from AWS in terms of making sure that there is actually that developer experience in there as well. So so pretty proud of that, very proud of that product, and sort of also where it's actually going to go as well. So yeah, we're a consulting partner, but we're also got an ISV partner as well.
That's very interesting. Usually it's one or the other. It's cool that you have a foot in both camps there. Yeah. So you mentioned some of the regulatory compliances. What are some of the other ones? Do you have a list available? Is that going to be on the stacks.io to?
Yeah, that's on there. But so the ones obviously for Australian customers, APRA is our regulatory organisation, but there is PCI, HIPAA. CSI benchmark level 1 as well. That's kind of automatically applied. There are a whole bunch of other. They're continually sort of enhancing that the bundles, that they call them rules bundles. You can actually customize them as well. So depending on the posture that you really want to have associated to a workload, that's another cool feature. And the other thing as well is, as rules get added from other customers, everyone benefits from that. So and that's in terms of the product roadmap, or more so how the product evolves. It's really from customer feedback, very similar to AWS, but It's not a matter of you're only seeing sort of a certain set of bundles. It's more a matter of as that evolves, that the product evolves, and all the customers that are using the product benefit as well.
Wow. So do they automatically get so you say you create a new role, it rolls out to them automatically?
Rolls out to them automatically, yeah.
Wow,
absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we have another question, and this one is pertaining to how enterprise or for users with enterprise, like how does AWS like help with infrastructure event management?
Yeah. So
you want to ask? Yeah.
I can. So event management in terms of monitoring.
I believe they're talking about infrastructure monitoring. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess at the core of all of AWS, you've got CloudWatch. But from yesterday's announcements, now we've got managed Prometheus and Grafana. So that's obviously the open source monitoring capability. The other bit there is the now I'm probably going to get this wrong, but the open telemetry standard, which was also released yesterday, allowing for there to be a common language for all events. So we find when enterprises are moving to AWS, there are a lot of sort of event sources that you need to gather, but there are also things to integrate into, whether it's Sumo Logic or Splunk, and what you find is trying to get a translation to all of that. So that's now obviously being offered as of yesterday. But I guess from that standpoint is, unless you're logging the actual metrics, you're not going to be able to capture them. So I think, as Werner said yesterday, we've got to log everything, and that's the thing. We also work with our customers as well to make sure you've got an ability to correlate. Because there's one thing about logging everything, but there's also a matter of actually correlating those events as well. So yeah, thinking about real best practices around correlation is key, specifically as you start to scale, because what you really don't want to be doing is spending hours trying to sift through logs. You really want to be able to get to the problem as quick as possible. So there are real best practices around that. And the other piece as well is to not get to the point where you are saturating yourself with alarms, but really alarming on the key bits of your infrastructure as well.
So I think, there's another question kind of adding on to it. Like, it asks, like, does AWS services integrate with CloudWatch to monitor all infrastructure events, or is there a dedicated staff member for enterprise to monitor users, Amazon CloudWatch events? I think, like, to answer the first part of the question, like AWS, like CloudWatch does integrate with virtually every single AWS service. Game Day, if you're able to kind of expand on, like, what do you mean by a dedicated, like, staff member? Are you asking whether, like, the managed service that, like, Versent provides kind of like helps with, like, the monitoring? There's obviously operational enablement from Versent to, like, their customers to kind of teach them, like, how to create dashboards, what key things, like, look out for, things like that. I don't know if that answers it, but if you want to kind of clarify that, we'll be more than happy to answer it as well.
Yeah. And actually, to kind of like bring it back to stacks, like you were discussing, what is implemented or what's included in stacks in regards to CloudWatch, right? Are there any rules already established within stacks that says, hey, we're going to go ahead and alert on these kinds of events?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are, so in terms of events pertaining to compliance, they're automatically sort of folded in. Okay. When it comes to the specific workload itself, that's where we sort of, that's the bounds where it stops, because it's specifically the workload itself. We need to work with the customer to really define the specific metrics, but ultimately from a platform perspective,
right
around, so whether it's guard duty alarms or CloudTrail alarms, all of the platform related sort of services that will alarm, they're already folded in. When it comes to sort of the layer above where the workload sort of sits, that's when we sort of come in and work with the customer to define those specific alarms for that around metrics and gathering the specifics, because ultimately that's going to be on a per workload basis.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of add on to what you guys were just talking about, so like Game Day. So I would say that it's not necessarily the idea of someone kind of like always watching, like looking at like these dashboards. Although as like a developer or ops person, you should be looking at it at least once a day, beginning of the day, halfway through the day, just looking at like if there's anything like that kind of went crazy. But yeah, I think the key thing to remember here is that you want to log everything, but you want to be able to like intelligently intelligently like go through like these logs. And so you like adding like, understanding your workload, kind of like what Josh was saying, like every workload is going to be a little bit different. So every like, metrics that you're going to be looking at is going to be a little bit different. But like, core things, kind of like EC2 instances. Let's like, for example, you have like a fleet of EC2 instances that is hosting like an application. Maybe one thing that you want to look out for is like CPU like utilization, right? Like if it's going like way too high, but then like from like another dashboard you see like there's no user like buying anything, then like you kind of want to figure out like, hey, what's kind of going on there? And so there'll be alerting that happens. And intelligent alerting is going to be a very common, in my opinion, a very common factor like moving on, because the idea is that exactly kind of what AM is saying is that there's an alert fatigue. If you have too many alerts, you're not going to care about any of the alerts. So what is like the optimal like alerts that you can have so that you can react as fast as you can to any scenario? So yeah.
And there is also within CloudWatch as well, like the anomaly detection as well. So there's also awesome sort of things that are getting folded into sort of CloudWatch as well to sort of provide you with the machine learning capabilities that AWS use as well. And that's a thing to sort of note is not just it's coupling those services together as well. But also spreading the responsibility. And now we're talking about that around sort of the DevOps principles. It's also making sure that the teams that are deploying into production are also taking ownership for that as well, rather than just having that the model of just having a central team or person managing the entire estate, but getting the specific teams actually onto. So within AWS, you've got the two pizza teams associated to a specific product, and similarly when you're working within an organization, it's having a team that actually manages all the way up and down the stack, so that you're spreading your operational capability across your entire organization.
Yeah, to kind of like paint like another picture of like the before and after landscape. Like Josh, you were saying that like, right out of college, you were a performance tester, right? A performance engineer. Yeah. Like, so the idea of kind of like, like testing. So I would say that like, when I first entered the industry, there was still the idea of like, there is a lot, I mean, like I haven't been in the industry for too long, but there's still this idea of like segregating like, software engineers and tests versus like actual like software engineers. And so now like, it's no longer the case. Like you're going to start seeing a lot less application position title that's saying like, hey, like we want like a software engineer in test. They're going to be like, hey, you should be writing code and you should be testing your code. Right.
Yeah.
So so that's kind of like what is like alluding to like what Josh is saying is like you're kind of sharing that responsibility across like the entire org. It's like if you're going to write the code, you got to test it. So
right. Absolutely. And that's what you kind of touched on this, Josh. That's what's kind of exciting about Code Guru, right? Is that it's kind of going to somewhat already do that for you. That now, by no means is it supposed to replace any of your testing, right, everyone? But it does help. It does give you an extra tool or an extra set of eyes to be able to look over your code and say, hey, actually, this is a very expensive line of code. Like, big O notation of, 1 power to the 100th or whatever. For whatever reason we don't catch that. It's actually very helpful. It's almost a replacement, I would say, to the rubber ducky, right? You don't have to talk to it and say, hey, this is why, but it does become a companion service to be able to help optimize that code, as everyone is talking here.
And the one service announcement that I was kind of excited about yesterday was the fault injection simulation. So it's obviously in preview, but for those that aren't aware, it's actually it's simulating chaos engineering. And I'm excited about that because that's a thing I guess we don't do enough of is we sort of wait for something to happen before we actually go in and sort of it's really more around proactiveness. So actually seeing how your infrastructure or more so your application will react if you inject faults into it and seeing if it actually is truly reliable. So yeah, pretty keen to see what that service is going to offer and really folding that into our sort of cloud adoption practice, because ultimately it's a matter of, sure, we can deliver something through best DevOps principles, but it's on the other side of things, making sure that it actually is reliable when it's in production using something like the fault injection simulation service. Right.
Absolutely. You mean chaos engineer is just turning off an EC2 instance, right, everyone?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, but that's kind of a fun topic to go into. What kind of chaos engineering does Versent do? I mean, it may not be the main thing, but I'm sure that there are a couple of tests that you all perform to be able to test out the disaster recovery plan. What are some of those things that Versent does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do that on a regular basis with our customers. So, and that's something, one of the service offerings from our managed services team is, so they actually do DR simulations as well as sort of, and make sure that they actually proactively working through what it actually will be like if a scenario like disaster happens. And they do simulations like taking an entire availability zone down by destroying everything in one and seeing what the result is, taking certain components out and seeing what that is. Sort of, and even injecting things into sort of like pretty much all layers as well, and working with the customer to also be able to understand what responses they need to work through, and actually seeing those alarms get triggered. So we're talking about alarms and metrics before, but unless you actually understand what that specific alarm is alarming on, and that's why sort of simulating that in production and really sort of getting that understanding around, so that when something does happen, it's really almost seamless and really sort of strengthens that response time as well.
Right, absolutely. That's something that we always talk. Eugene and I talk with a lot of partners as partner solutions architects, and one of the things that we really want to make sure is that there's a disaster recovery plan, but that it's actually being practiced. Right, it's one thing to have one in place, but when everything is on fire, it's hard to go and flip out the playbook, and realize, okay, so step one, looks like we need to cut off the network to this EC2 instance. That's not something you want to be doing. It should be something that's second nature. So it's amazing that you're able to actually reproduce a lot of those tests and actually have them practice live, just so that when it's not an actual emergency.
Yeah, and I guess that's the strength of the sort of automation that we pretty much underpins all of our practices, really, is to showcase to the customer that you can spin up an account, spin up all the necessary scaffolding in there, and actually simulate DR without having to really have a lot of manual intervention. I think in my past life, I've done a lot of things when I was starting my career. When it came to a DR simulation, it was hours and hours and hours of manual work. Whereas now, fast forward 15 years, it's all automated. Everything's delivered through pipelines, and it's a matter of actually showcasing that to the customer. And I think that also resonates with them, is to say, actually, hang on a second, this cloud adoption journey has meant that I can simulate that and showcase that I can actually have that reliability. And do that without any disruption to sort of production as well. So that's kind of key as well.
Yeah. So Stephen, there's a question in the chat for Stephen. I think Josh already kind of talked a little bit about like the different like simulations and like real like faults. So, like for example, they have like a team like DDoS or that tries attempt like DDoS attacks to like test like the resilience of your architecture. So I hope that answers your question. And I like to kind of just like say this pretty often, but nothing kind of shows you how resilient like a platform is when someone accidentally deletes an entire production ECS cluster. Nothing.
Yes.
This happened.
Absolutely.
This happened this year for me, right before I joined AWS. Woke up at 4 a.m. and I was on a bridge with like 30 people, and they were just asking like, hey, like what's like, why is there 30 people on this bridge, first of all? And then we're just like, oh, like I'm just gonna check on like, my team's like service. I'm like, so there's supposed to be this ECS like prod cluster that's supposed to have all these like, that's supposed to be there. And I was like, I don't see this prod cluster. And I was like, hey guys, I don't think we have a prod cluster. And if we didn't have a reliable kind of like pipeline to redeploy everything, that's backbreaking, right? Yeah. But instead we had like a planned rollout within kind of like 30 minutes of like everything being deleted, and there was nothing that I could really do. So yeah, like I went back to sleep. But like I think again, like it kind of went like a great story is that like being able to recover is hugely important, because you don't know what happened. And in this instance, like that was like that I'm mentioning, it wasn't like a malicious attack. It was, they didn't really follow like the best practice. They gave a contractor admin privileges in the prod AWS account, and I think they were trying to delete like a service, but they instead deleted the entire like cluster. So again, that's kind of goes to show a real life example.
And it happens, it does happen quite a bit actually, in terms of, and that's I guess the key in terms of making sure that you sort of, I guess I'll sort of preface that with sort of with Stacks, and making sure one of the things that it does provide is least privilege, because so many times you sort of see that someone's given elevated privileges, and then something like that happens, and you don't want to be woken up at 4 a.m. for and try to recover from that. But
So yeah, I think we do need to kind of wrap a little bit. Josh, I wanted to kind of like, because part of this call, or sorry, not part of this call, but part of this show is to kind of talk about like the APN ambassador program. Just wanted to give you a bit of time to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So the APN Ambassador Program actually started about 5 years ago in Australia and New Zealand. It was called the Cloud Warrior Program, and now it's actually evolved into a global program. And the thing there is, it really sort of showcases it's an ability for consulting partners to have people join the program that are pretty much passionate and experts on the AWS platform. So in order to join, you do need to be professionally certified, either in a pro cert or a specialty cert. And you need to demonstrate the ability to produce content related to AWS, and whether that's blog posts or webinars or hosting user groups. And the way that I was able to join was, we've got 3 ambassadors within Versent, and I sort of work with them to sort of pretty much put a plan together to say, how can I sort of work around? And the year when I joined, I sort of was able to speak at Summit. I wrote a few blog posts. I sort of hosted a few webinars as well. So, and then I was able to be nominated through to the program. So now it's a global program. The great thing about it is it's actually bringing consulting partners together across the globe. And being in Australia, we're kind of so far away from a time zone perspective, but we can actually now sort of connect with other partners or other consulting partners across the globe, and it really is awesome in terms of that. And Elaine Perales is the actual the global lead, has done a great job in terms of when you're part of the program and you're nominated in, we pretty much get monthly webinars from the services team. We get together, obviously this year virtually at every summit. And then the top contributors get a chance to go to Seattle. So I was there last year in Seattle, where we meet together and have a global ambassador summit. So they are raising the bar every year. And this year, you've got to have contributed 5 times in the different areas. There's a specific point system. So it's almost, they've gamified it a bit, which is good. There's a bit of competition, and they announce who are the top contributors. We've got some people here in Australia in terms, I'll shout out to Arjun. He pretty much produces a blog every week. So there's quite a high bar to sort of keep up to, but ultimately what they're really wanting to do is for us to showcase our expertise in the program, and it's like, in terms of, for us, we're all passionate about AWS, so it does come somewhat naturally, but it does require you to sort of be continually active, and they reset it every year. So you've got to, in order to continue to be an ambassador, you've got to have a certain level of points, and they're all associated to those outputs. So yeah, it's a great program to be a part of, and I'm kind of honored to be part of it. So sure. And I'm sure they'll raise the bar next year, and there'll be a lot more things that we'll have to do, but that's all part of being part of it.
Sure.
That's all part of like being curious and learning, right? So
exactly, yeah. So and that's the thing, right? And ultimately, and for that is then you sort of share your knowledge. Like, I'm writing a book about the Well Architected Framework at the moment, sort of doing some blog series, but I've been challenged to write a book about it in terms of, so that's one of those things, and you can sort of attribute that to a contribution. So it's cool. It's definitely the way to keep on top of it, on top of all of the service announcements, and for us, it gives us an avenue to sort of promote the partner program.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, Josh, thank you very much for coming on. If people want to learn more about Versent, where would they be able to find you online?
Yeah, so me personally, in terms of Josh Lopez Tech is my Twitter handle. But in terms of Versent, do reach out to versent.com.au for we've obviously can be easily reached. And then in terms of for Stacks team, it's stacks.io. But I'm so LinkedIn or any other socials, you can get in touch with me. We can definitely have a bit more of a chat around cloud adoption, and always happy to assist in any way I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. So the way that we sign off here at the Howdy Partners, we got 3 phrases that you can get to choose from, right? First one is, y'all come back now, giddy up, or happy trails. And you get to pick which one, and on a count of 3, we'll all say it.
All right. Well, I think because we're kind of coming at the end of reInvent, we're going to say happy trails.
All right. So let's do this. 1, 2, 3. Happy trails.
Happy trails.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
I'll take care.